Hello, BookTube. I'm Duncan, and today we are joined by a very special guest. Boy. So I set up on the sofa to film, all good, and then suddenly he pops in, and obviously wants to sit. There you go, good boy. Obviously wants to sit exactly where I've set up to film, and yeah. So yeah, there's boy. There's a good chance to get a real close up of him because he's a very stubborn dog. He doesn't. If you want him in a video, he won't appear, but if you don't, he will. Hopefully he'll just stay still. If I stay still, he'll probably just settle down now. And so I can talk about a recent haul that I have acquired. This is actually half of the haul. I partly blame Peg at the history bookshelf for this haul. I wasn't supposed to be buying books en masse anymore. I have a lot of home repairs to put money in. Now I'm a homeowner, been a homeowner for a year now, so money should really be going to the house and nothing else. But she held up a great book about South Sudan. It's been following what's going on about South Sudan for the past 10 years since independence. And so I was very swayed by that, and at the same time it was like very serendipitous happenstance. At the same time, the big chain store up here in Canada, Chapters Indigo, they emailed me to say they were having a big, I think 20% off everything in store sale. So I grabbed a few books, and the three that I grabbed, nothing to do with Peg, so I guess she's not completely to blame, but books I've had my eye on for a while, and two of them are definitely linked, and another one is linked with a previous book I have hauled that I don't believe I showed on this channel, and so I'm going to show that one too. But yeah, I just thought they were interesting books that I wanted to share, and unlike a lot of people seemingly on BookTube that have somehow become suddenly socially aware and maybe anti-materialistic, have somehow equated that to books and are not so much in favor of the book haul as a kind of gross overindulgence of materialism. But I, on the other hand, do not equate books to material objects in the same way. I mean, yes, they are material objects that you pay for, and yes, I do prefer books over ebooks, even though essentially the access to information is the same. I just don't like to read on a screen, even though I did have a Kindle, and maybe the fact that my Kindle did break, I have a little kind of issue with that, and I've gone back to just wanting to read books. But to me, books are more than a sum of the actual physical property. It's information, it's knowledge, and so I have no problem with book hauls, and not all book hauls have to cost you money. You know, I love people who hold up library books. I sadly cannot get to my library due to my work schedule and the restrictive hours of libraries in low population countryside. They just don't have the ability to be open morning to night 6 days a week. They're open, I think the one in Elgin I think is open 5 days a week, which is pretty good. Afternoons, mornings, and there's one day where I think it's open all day. But I get off work at 5. I start at work at 7:30 and I get off at 5. So there's just no, and I work on a Saturday. I could potentially just nip in, but I don't particularly want to have to rush up to the library on a Saturday and rush around to grab books. It's not how I library. But anyway, I should get on with the books because these ones are quite exciting. And so firstly, the first two I will show, the two linked, Selvon's The Lonely Londoners. This has been on my radar for a wee while now. And I think Selvon's possibly having a little resurgence. I know Eric Allan recently read The Housing Lark, which I think just came out in Penguin Classics either this year or last year. I think it's quite recent, but this is the Penguin Modern Classics, which they've changed a lot in my life. I don't know if this is a modern thing or if it's just a North American thing. But this is, you can't tell, but this is like plasticized paper, or I don't know what the technical term is, but it's definitely coated. It doesn't feel like paper. It's got that kind of glossy, and it's a little bit more sturdy. But the Penguin Modern Classics that I grew up with they were very papery, but in that like kind of high quality newspapery kind of way. And I always felt like if I rubbed them a lot, it would just come right off. But I always loved the visual. I always loved like Penguin Modern Classics. Their aesthetics is beautiful. Just these usually black and white photographs, but often like perfect. Perfectly encaptures the subject matter. They're very easy to spot in a bookstore. I used to, when I lived in the UK, half of my reading probably was just going into a Waterstones or whatever, and glancing at the shelves and just grabbing any Penguin Modern Classic. I don't think I've ever been let down. But I am more of a I was gonna say contemporary reader, but I don't read contemporary. I don't really read much contemporary fiction, but I read modern era, so kind of like 1900s. I predominantly read 1900s to 1960s fiction. That's kind of my wheelhouse, my oeuvre, my era. So that I feel like the modern classics range is really fits into that really well, and yeah, they've always been great to me. But anyway, Selvon, he came over. He was a journalist in Trinidad. I think he ran it was something like the Trinidad Tribune or something. And then he came over to London in the 1950s, kind of as part of the Windrush generation. I think he's a little bit different though, because he's more of an academic literary kind of exile, rather than a lot of the Windrush generation came over to work in the NHS and other such jobs that were in high demand in the UK in the 1950s, as it was rebuilding after the war. But he came over as more of a of a learned journalist, writer, and yeah, he wrote some books. And then actually the part of his biography that I didn't know is later in life, a bit later, I think in the 70s maybe, he came to Canada. He moved to Calgary, I believe it was, and yeah, and so this is I believe it's really one of his seminal works. This and The Housing Lark. I think he's written a few others, and he wrote. I think half of his books are set in London and half are set in the West Indies. Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really interesting read, because I think a lot of Black British culture just really hasn't really been celebrated and highlighted and talked about, and I certainly haven't really read a lot. I know that's partly my fault, but it's also just not. There really isn't a celebration of the rich history of black culture in the UK. And I mean, even though this is Windrush, like, it didn't start with Windrush. There is there's a more vast history of black people within the UK. I mean, the UK had it had an empire for so long, and that empire was built by African slaves. The sugar industry was absolutely hugely fundamental in that empire, and that was all built by African slaves in the West Indies and Caribbean, and so it's hugely they were hugely influential to the British Empire, even if they didn't want to be. And yeah, I think need to read way more fiction and non-fiction on the whole thing. Yeah, I'm kind of rambling. It's kind of hard. He's moving about a bit, so it's kind of hard to concentrate sometimes. And so yeah, really excited to read this. I actually almost just dived straight into it as soon as I got it. It looks like it's very small. It's like 140 pages too, so I'll probably rush right through it because I realized I thought I was a bit of a slow reader, but I think I actually do read a little bit longer books than a lot of booktubers. I mean, I know a lot of the fantasy readers, they read like 800-page books like that. That'll never be me, but I realized a lot of people who read the contemporary fiction, a lot of those are around 200 pages, and I kind of maybe didn't realize that at first. And yeah, I mean, I'll never apologize. I'll never be ashamed that I read 20 books a year. I think most years I average between 20 and 40 books a year. It's just I'd like to be able to read a book a year, but I won't change my reading habits. I won't shy away from like 1,000-page book just to fit in an arbitrary number of books. But anyway, that's Sam Selvon. You should definitely check him out if that interests you. And so that links with this book, which I actually am surprised hasn't been talked about more. I've seen Simon Savage talk about it. I don't know if I've seen anyone else. But this is Louise Hare's This Lovely City, and the reason that it fits in with Sam Selvon's The Lonely Londoners, not just because it's two books about black culture and black people in London, but also the Louise Hare. I watched this great interview with her actually, where she just walks around London, talking about some of the places that inspired her. About this book, but she specifically mentions that Sam Selvon's The Lonely Londoners was a huge inspiration to her, and I think she recently reread it whilst maybe before writing this book, around there. And so yeah, and I mean, firstly, this is a fantastic cover that I think perfectly encapsulates what this is about. This is a set in the 1950s jazz. I think it's 1950s. Yeah, 1950s. It's reset in Soho's jazz clubs, and I think partly inspired by Ronnie Scott's, even though I think Ronnie Scott's was started in the 60s, I believe, and so actually Ronnie Scott's isn't. This time here predates Ronnie Scott's, but it's definitely been an influence. But yeah, this is really, I think, also possibly talking about a culture of Britain, especially London, that is maybe less talked about too. It's the 1950 jazz scene, and I think a lot of post-war British literature is very grim is very stark. It's like rationing, and it's trying to literally rebuild the embers of a city, because a lot of London and other parts of the UK were heavily bombed. I mean, if you watch even watch something as silly as Passport to Pimlico, it all starts off with kids playing in a bomb crater in London, and I mean, even today they're still finding German bombs in the UK. I mean, I remember my childhood, there's going to be at least 5 or 6 in and around the area I lived in, I think. And we lived in the country. I mean, we lived in a very heavy militarized part of the countryside. Lived near Salisbury Plain, which is, I think, still the biggest military training ground in Britain, and it's very important. But 5 or 6 World War II bomb disposals in and around when I lived there. But anyway, so this is really a set in, and I think a celebration of the 1950s jazz culture and the kind of exuberance and I think almost escapism from the harsher realities of the rebuilding Britain. But yeah, I'm very excited to read this, and it's also great that it is in Canada. It is published by House of Anansi. I'm not sure who published it in the UK, for anyone UK-wise. And House of Anansi is also the US publisher as well. I didn't realize they had that reach. I don't believe this actually says who is the UK publisher. But I will give kudos to the cover illustrator, who is Anna Morrison. So, great job, Anna Morrison. This is beautiful. I don't know if this is the same as the UK. I can't remember what the UK one looks like. It could be. I don't know. But anyway, Anna Morrison, whoever you are, wherever you are from, this is awesome. And also Louise Hare. I hope to really, really sit down and enjoy this. I talked about this, I think, in the self-aware tag, that how I'm not very shocked. I'm very rarely shocked or surprised by how much I enjoy a book. And I think this is the case of, like, I've read reviews, I've seen the author. Usually if I watch a lot of interviews and stuff with the author, I'm always going to love the book, just because if I've spent that much time within the author's presence and they haven't annoyed me and I've really liked them and I've really liked what they're talking about, then I'm going to like their writing as well. It's very, very rare do I ever not like the writing style of someone that I like in interviews. I'm more likely to not like a writer in interviews and actually like their writing. That's can be more surprising, but generally people who are lovely in person and have a really good way to being interviewed and really intelligent answers are usually also I find they really bring that across in their writing too. So yeah, I think I will absolutely love this. And again, I almost dived straight into it when I got it, so can't wait. And then the next 2 books are quite different, I guess. They're non-fiction. They're maybe a little bit more on the less enjoyable, intriguing but less enjoyable just because of the subject matter. And so I just spotted this. I think I've seen it before, but I just spotted it when I was buying the other books I just mentioned. But it was just too intriguing, way too intriguing, and also kind of goes against some notions we have here in Canada. So this is the Ku Klux Klan in Canada. A century of promoting racism, hate, and the peaceable kingdom. And so this is all about the history of the Klan in Canada, which I think a lot of people will be surprised about. But there has been a lot of hate in Canada that has been kind of forgotten about, washed under the carpet. I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's a national characteristic. I think I'm saying these are definitely subversive, people in the very minority, and I would still think the majority of Canadians are lovely and do not wish hate on people. I mean, there is still a lot of issues regarding Indigenous peoples and even French Canadians. There's a lot of issues there that still need to be unresolved, and I think a lot of people are aware of that history and stuff. But I think the general kind of Klan hate kind of stuff is been kind of largely forgotten. And so basically, I think this talks about 20s and 30s. There was a huge Klan presence, and then it kind of died out. But it did come back in the 70s and 80s, which probably will be the most surprising. I think people, maybe 2030s. That was I think the second coming of the Klan in America, and yes, they might be less surprised by that, especially with the world politics and world events of that time. But I think hearing that the resurgence in the 70s and 80s, unless you were alive then and had a specific contact with it, then you might be a little surprised. But yeah, that's very intriguing. I don't really know. I don't know that much actually about racial politics in Canada or subversive groups, other than the very modern day ones. But yeah, this does seem like a very, very intriguing read, and it ties in nicely with a book I picked up a few months ago, I think, which is Sorry, that was published. That was authored by Allan Bartley. Sorry, it's very small down there. Allan Bartley. And the publisher is Formac, which I don't know. I don't really know Formac, but I'll be intrigued. And Allan Bartley he's researched the history of the KKK in Canada for many years, and he's a former intelligence analyst in the Canadian security community, and he teaches at Carleton University, which Carleton, I believe, is Ottawa. Correct me if I'm wrong. I sometimes get a bit mixed up, but I think Carleton is Ottawa. But anyway, it ties in really nicely with Linda Gordon's The Second Coming of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s, the American political tradition. And I think when most people think of the KKK, they think of the South and Southern Democrats and the infamous scene in what's the silent movie? I've completely blinded. But that infamous scene and obviously the lynchings and killings and cross burnings, in the South. But what this is more, well, this is kind of describing more of the kind of toxic legacy of the KKK imparted into American society and politics that never really got exorcised. And actually in the Second Coming of the KKK, it was very prevalent in the North. I think people who aren't really super read into this nowadays, I think, don't realize how prevalent the KKK was in the North and how much hate there was. And I think there's too much of a characteristic that the North, and I think it even dates back to the Civil War, how the North was so good and the South was the horrible racists. But that was also prevalent in the 50s too. The 20s to the 50s. 20s to, what is it? Second Coming is about the 20s to the 50s, I think. But yeah, this is going to be a very, very interesting read. And I think hopefully it also goes into what I found really intriguing is a lot of the Democrats that were KKK members, and I think there was one Southern Democrat who was, he wasn't a Grand Eagle, but he was one or two down from that. He was basically a recruiter for the KKK. He never left politics, and in the big shift in the Democratic Party in the 60s, mainly through JFK and LBJ, he ended up voting for the Civil Rights Act. And to me that is mind-boggling, that he remained in politics and a Democrat the whole time, whilst being in the KKK. Not just being in the KKK, being high up in the KKK. He wasn't just some youthful, brainwashed kid or whatever. He was drinking the Kool-Aid. He was far up in the KKK. He remained in politics and a Democrat. I can never remember his name, but it doesn't matter what his name is. He remained in politics and a Democrat, and then ended up voting for the Civil Rights Act. It's mind-boggling, but that's what happened in American politics during all those years. During the 50s and 60s, there was a weird, massive shift, and people kind of seemed to change their ideologies. I wonder how much their ideologies and hate changed, or they just had political nous and survival, and I don't know. Who knows? But always intrigued me. So yeah. So that's a book I had recently. And so hopefully the other books turn up soon. And I just bought more books today because Versa were having a 40% end of year sale, which is terrible. I need to stop buying books just because I have lots of house needs. I probably also need a few more clothing items for work too, just for the winter. It's starting to turn cold now, so I think I probably need a new pair of winter boots. So books are lovely, but they are not the priority right now. So need to stop. Anyway, hope you're all having a great weekend, and I'll hopefully see you again soon, probably with another tag. But yeah, have a good one.